Detective Kevin Murphy walked through the police station doors at exactly 7:30 in the morning, just like he had done for the past 12 years. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and thick hands that had seen plenty of action on the Yao streets. His uniform was always clean and pressed, his shoes polished to a shine. From the outside, he looked like any other good cop doing his job. But Kevin Murphy was not like other cops. Deep down inside, he carried something dark and ugly that he tried to hide from most people. He did not like people who looked different from him. He did not like people who spoke with different accents. He especially did not like people who he thought did not belong in positions of power. Murphy had learned how to hide these feelings well over the years. He knew exactly what to say during training sessions about treating everyone fairly. He could smile and nod when the captain talked about community policing and respect for all citizens, but when he was out on patrol, away from the watchful eyes of his supervisors, Murphy let his true nature show. The other officers in the station had mixed feelings about Murphy. Some of the younger cops were afraid of him because he had a quick temper and a loud voice. He would yell at rookies who made small mistakes and embarrass them in front of everyone. The older officers mostly ignored him, but a few of them shared his views and would laugh at his crude jokes during break time. Murphy had developed a system over the years that kept him out of serious trouble. When he wrote reports about arrests, he was careful to use the right words. He never wrote down the racist things he said to suspects. He never mentioned how he treated people differently based on how they looked. His reports always made him sound professional and fair. If anyone ever complained about his behavior, Murphy would deny everything. He would act shocked that someone would say such things about him. He had learned to cry racism in reverse, claiming that people were only complaining about him because they did not like white cops. This tactic had saved his job more than once. The ICI. Truth was that Murphy had been getting away with bad behavior for so long that he started to believe he was untouchable. He thought his badge gave him the right to treat people however he wanted. He thought his 12 years of service meant that no one could question his actions. Murphy had his routines at the station, and everyone knew them. He always parked in the same spot in the parking lot, even though it was not officially assigned to him. He always used the same locker in the changing room, and he always sat at the same table in the cafeteria during lunchtime. The table Murphy claimed as his own was near the big window that looked out onto the street. It was in a good spot where he could see everyone who came and went. From that table, he could watch the other officers and listen to their conversations. It made him feel important and in control. Most officers avoided sitting at Murphy's table, even when the cafeteria was crowded. They had learned that he did not like to share his space. If someone accidentally sat there, Murphy would stand behind them and clear his throat loudly until they moved. If that did not work, he would make comments about how some people did not understand respect. The few times that new officers tried to sit at the table, Murphy would explain the unwritten rules of the station. He would tell them that certain seats were for certain people, and that they needed to learn their place. His voice would be calm but threatening, and the message was always clear. This is my territory. Life at the station had been predictable for Murphy until 3 weeks ago, when everything started to change. The department announced that they were bringing in someone new to head the Internal Affairs Division. Internal Affairs was the department that investigated complaints against police officers. It was the job that no cop wanted to deal with. Murphy did not pay much attention to the announcement at first. He had dealt with internal affairs investigations before, and they never amounted to much. He knew how to handle investigators with his smooth talking and careful paperwork. Besides, most of the internal affairs officers were men who understood how things really worked on the streets. But then Murphy heard something that made his blood boil. The new head of internal affairs was going to be a woman. Not just any woman, but a Latina woman named Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez. Murphy could not believe that the department would put someone like her in charge of investigating real cops like him. Murphy started asking questions about Rodriguez as soon as he heard the news. He learned that she had transferred from another city, where she had built a reputation for being tough on police misconduct. She had investigated and fired several officers in her previous job. Some people said she was fair and thorough, Murphy heard something else in those words. To Murphy, Rodriguez represented everything he feared about the changing world around him. She was a woman in a position of authority over men. She was Hispanic in a job that Murphy thought should go to someone who looked like him. Worst of all, she was coming to his station with the power to investigate him and potentially end his career. Murphy began to feel like the walls were closing in around him. For 12 years, he had been able to do his job the way he wanted to do it. He had been able to express his true feelings about people he did not like. He had been able to intimidate suspects and fellow officers without facing real consequences. Now there was going to be someone watching him, someone who might not be impressed by his years of service or his ability to talk his way out of trouble. Someone who might actually listen to the complaints that people made about him. Someone who might dig deeper into his reports and find the truth behind his careful words. As the days passed and Rodriguez's start date got closer, Murphy's anxiety turned into anger. He began to complain loudly to anyone who would listen about how the department was going downhill. He made comments about how political correctness was ruining police work. He suggested that Rodriguez had only gotten the job because of her gender and ethnicity, not because of her qualifications. The morning that Rodriguez was scheduled to start work, Murphy arrived at the station with a knot in his stomach and fire in his eyes. He went through his usual routine, but everything felt different. He knew that his comfortable world was about to be challenged, and he was not going to let that happen without a fight. Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez arrived at the police station on Monday morning, carrying a box of personal items and a briefcase full of case files. She was a woman of average height with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp brown eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. She wore a crisp white shirt under her dark blue uniform, and her badge gleamed in the morning light. Rodriguez had been working in law enforcement for 15 years, starting as a patrol officer and working her way up through detective work and internal investigations. She had seen the worst of police behavior in her previous job, where she had been forced to fire 3 officers for serious misconduct. She knew that taking the internal affairs position would not make her popular, but she believed in holding police officers to the highest standards. The other officers watched Rodriguez carefully as she moved through the station that first day. Some were curious about the new boss who would be investigating their colleagues. Others were worried about what changes she might bring. A few whispered among themselves about whether she would be tough enough to handle the job. Rodriguez spent her first week learning about the department and reviewing old cases. She discovered that the previous internal affairs head had been very relaxed about investigating complaints. Many cases had been closed quickly without thorough investigation. Some complaints had been dismissed entirely without any follow-up. During her second week, Rodriguez began to hear Murphy's name mentioned in several old complaint files. Citizens had accused him of using excessive force, making racist comments, and treating people unfairly during arrests. Each time, the complaints had been investigated briefly and then dismissed for lack of evidence. Rodriguez made notes about Murphy in her private files. She wanted to learn more about him before taking any action. She began to observe him from a distance, watching how he interacted with other officers and how he conducted himself around the station. What Rodriguez saw troubled her. Murphy was loud and aggressive with younger officers. He made jokes that seemed designed to make people uncomfortable. During roll call meetings, he would roll his eyes when supervisors talked about community relations or fair treatment of suspects. Rodriguez also noticed that Murphy seemed to have claimed certain areas of the station as his own territory. Other officers would avoid sitting near him in meetings. They would change their path through the hallways to avoid walking past his desk. Even veteran officers seemed nervous around him. By her third week on the job, Rodriguez had decided that Murphy needed to be watched carefully. She had not yet found enough evidence to open a formal investigation, but she was building a file of observations and complaints. She knew that eventually Murphy would make a mistake that she could act on. The confrontation began on a Thursday afternoon, when Rodriguez decided to eat lunch in the station cafeteria instead of going out to a restaurant. She had been working through lunch most days, trying to catch up on the backlog of cases left by her predecessor. Today she felt like taking a real break and getting to know some of the other officers better. The cafeteria was busier than usual because it was raining. Outside, and most officers had decided to stay in the building for lunch. Rodriguez looked around for an empty table and spotted one near the window that had only one person sitting at it. She walked over and asked the young officer if she could share the table. The rookie officer looked nervous and glanced around the room before nodding quickly. He finished his sandwich in just a few bites and hurried away, leaving Rodriguez alone at the table. She thought his behavior was strange but did not worry about it. She opened her case files and began to review them while she ate her salad. Rodriguez was deep in reading when she heard heavy footsteps approaching her table. She looked up to see Murphy standing beside her chair, his face red with anger and his hands clenched into fists. She had never spoken to him directly before, but she recognized him from his personnel photos and from watching him around the station. Murphy stared down at Rodriguez with pure hatred in his eyes. The cafeteria had grown quiet as other officers sensed the tension building. Some pretended to keep eating while watching from the corners of their eyes. Others stopped talking entirely and turned to see what was happening. "That's my seat," Murphy said in a loud voice that carried across the entire cafeteria. His tone was not polite or respectful. It was the voice of someone who expected immediate obedience. Rodriguez looked up at Murphy calmly and set down her fork. She had dealt with aggressive officers before and knew that showing fear would only make the situation worse. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your name on it," she replied in a steady voice. "This appears to be general seating for all department personnel." Murphy's face grew even redder at her response. He had expected her to apologize and move immediately. No one had ever challenged his claim to that table before. "You don't understand how things work around here," he said, his voice getting louder. "That table has been mine for 12 years. Everyone knows that." Rodriguez remained seated and kept her voice calm and professional. "I understand that you may have a routine, Officer Murphy, but this is a public area. All sworn personnel have equal access to the facilities." She emphasized his rank deliberately, reminding him that she outranked him as a lieutenant. The sound of his name seemed to surprise Murphy. He realized that the new internal affairs head knew exactly who he was. This was not some random encounter with a new officer who did not know the rules. This was a direct challenge to his authority from someone who had the power to cause him real trouble. Murphy looked around the cafeteria and saw that everyone was watching them. Some of the officers were holding up their phones, possibly recording the confrontation. He knew he should walk away and find another place to sit, but his pride would not let him back down in front of so many witnesses. "Listen here," Murphy said, leaning closer to Rodriguez's table. "I don't care what rank you think you have. I've been working this job since before you probably even thought about being a cop. People like you need to learn to show respect to officers who have actually earned their place here." The phrase "people like you" hung in the air like poison. Everyone in the cafeteria understood what Murphy meant, even though he had not used any specific racial slurs. Rodriguez felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. Rodriguez slowly closed her case files and began to pack them into her briefcase. She could feel the eyes of every officer in the room watching her next move. She knew that how she handled this moment would set the tone for her entire tenure as Internal Affairs head. "Officer Murphy," she said clearly, making sure her voice carried to every corner of the room. "Your comments and behavior will be noted in my daily report. I suggest you take some time to review the department's policies on professional conduct and workplace respect." Murphy's hands began to shake with rage as he realized that Rodriguez was not going to be intimidated. She was not going to apologize or move from his table. Instead, she was threatening to write him up for his behavior. After 12 years of getting his way through intimidation, Murphy was facing someone who would not back down. Rodriguez stood up slowly from her chair, keeping her movements calm and controlled. She could feel the tension in the room growing thicker with each passing second. Every officer in the cafeteria was watching to see what would happen next. Some had stopped eating entirely, their sandwiches forgotten on their plates. Others were whispering quietly to each other about what they were witnessing. Murphy took a step closer to Rodriguez as she gathered her things. His breathing was heavy and his face was still flushed with anger. He could not believe that this woman was defying him in front of all these people. In his mind, she was supposed to respect his authority and his years of service. She was supposed to know her place. "You think you can just walk in here and change everything," Murphy said, his voice getting louder with each word. "You think because they gave you some fancy title that you can push around real cops who have been doing this job longer than you've been alive." Rodriguez placed her briefcase on the table and looked directly at Murphy. Her brown eyes were steady and unafraid. "Officer Murphy, I am not pushing anyone around. I am simply eating my lunch in a public area. Your behavior right now is inappropriate and unprofessional." Murphy laughed, but it was not a happy sound. It was the kind of laugh that came from someone who was losing control of their emotions. Inappropriate? Unprofessional? You want to see inappropriate? I'll show you what happens when people like you try to tell people like me what to do. The phrase "people like you" was becoming Murphy's favorite weapon in this confrontation. He was using it instead of saying the specific racist words that were running through his mind. He thought he was being clever by not using obvious slurs, but everyone in the room understood exactly what he meant. Rodriguez felt a cold anger building inside her chest, but she kept her voice level and professional. "Officer Murphy, I am ordering you to step back and control yourself. Your comments are creating a hostile work environment and violating department policy." Murphy's eyes went wide with rage at being given an order by Rodriguez. "You're ordering me? You're ordering me?" His voice rose to almost a shout. "I don't take orders from some affirmative action hire who only got her job because of what she looks like." A gasp went through the cafeteria as Murphy finally said what everyone knew he was thinking. Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few looked down at their food, not wanting to be part of what was happening. Others pulled out their phones and began recording the confrontation. Officer Jake Collins, a veteran with 20 years of experience, stood up from his table near the back of the room. He had seen enough confrontations in his career to know when a situation was about to get out of hand. "Murphy, maybe you should take a walk and cool off," he called out in a calm voice. Murphy spun around to face Collins. "Stay out of this, Jake. This is between me and the diversity hire." He turned back to Rodriguez with hatred burning in his eyes. "You people always think you deserve special treatment. You think you can come into our house and tell us how to do our jobs." Rodriguez picked up her briefcase and took a step toward the cafeteria exit. She had heard enough racist comments for one day, and she knew that continuing this confrontation would only make things worse. "This conversation is over, Officer Murphy. Report to my office at 3 o'clock this afternoon so we can discuss your behavior in a more appropriate setting." Murphy moved quickly to block Rodriguez's path to the door. He was a big man, much larger than Rodriguez, and he used his size to intimidate her. "You're not going anywhere until I'm finished talking to you," he said in a low, threatening voice. "You need to understand how things work around here before you start making demands." The cafeteria fell completely silent. Even the officers who had been whispering stopped talking. Everyone could see that Murphy was losing control, but no one was sure what to do about it. Rodriguez was their superior officer, but Murphy was their colleague. The situation was unlike anything most of them had ever seen. Rodriguez looked up at Murphy without showing any fear. "Officer Murphy, you are now physically blocking a superior officer and making verbal threats. I am ordering you to step aside, immediately." Murphy leaned down closer to Rodriguez's face. "Superior officer? You're not superior to anyone in this room. You're just some quota filler who got lucky. In the real world, you would never make it as a cop. You would be too busy crying about how hard the job is." Sergeant Amy Patterson, who had been watching from a corner table, stood up and started walking toward the confrontation. She had served as a police officer for 12 years and had worked her way up through the ranks despite facing her own share of discrimination. She knew exactly what Rodriguez was dealing with. "Murphy, that's enough," Patterson said firmly as she approached. "You need to back down right now before you do something stupid." Murphy glanced at Patterson with disgust. "Oh great, now we have another one trying to tell me what to do. What is this, some kind of women's liberation meeting? Maybe you two should go back to filing paperwork and let the real cops handle the important work." Rodriguez had heard enough. She had tried to handle the situation professionally, but Murphy was escalating beyond all reason. She knew that every word he was saying was being recorded by multiple officers. She also knew that his behavior was creating a hostile work environment for every minority officer in the department. Officer Murphy, you are now in direct violation of several department policies, Rodriguez said in a clear voice that carried throughout the cafeteria. You are creating a hostile work environment, making racially motivated comments and threatening a superior officer. I am placing you on immediate administrative suspension pending a full investigation. Murphy's face turned almost purple with crush. The idea that Rodriguez could suspend him was more than he could bear. He had never been suspended in 12 years on the force. He had always been able to talk his way out of trouble or intimidate his accusers into backing down. You can't suspend me, Murphy shouted. You don't have that kind of authority. I'm a real cop with real experience. You're just some political appointment who doesn't know the first thing about police work. Rodriguez began walking toward the exit again, but Murphy stepped directly in front of her. This time he was so close that she could smell the coffee on his breath and see the veins bulging in his neck. His hands were shaking with anger, and his whole body seemed to vibrate with barely contained violence. Get out of my way, officer. Murphy, Rodriguez said firmly. You are making this situation much worse for yourself. Murphy looked around the cafeteria at all the officers watching him. He saw some of them recording with their phones. He saw others shaking their heads in disapproval. He realized that his career was probably over no matter what he did next. If Rodriguez suspended him and investigated his past behavior, she would find enough evidence to fire him and possibly press criminal charges. In that moment of realization, something snapped inside Murphy's mind. If his career was over anyway, he decided he might as well go out fighting. He was not going to let some woman who looked like Rodriguez destroy everything he had worked for. He was going to show everyone in that cafeteria who was really in charge. Murphy's right hand moved slowly toward his service weapon. Murphy's hand wrapped around the grip of his service weapon with practiced ease. The familiar weight of the gun felt comforting in his palm as he slowly pulled it from its holster. Time seemed to move in slow motion as the black metal cleared the leather and came into view of everyone in the cafeteria. Rodriguez saw the weapon appear and felt her heart start beating faster, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had been in dangerous situations before during her 15 years in law enforcement. She knew that showing panic would only make Murphy more aggressive and unpredictable. The cafeteria erupted into chaos as officers realized what was happening. Several people knocked over their chairs as they jumped up from their tables. Others dove behind furniture or pressed themselves against the walls. A few officers reached for their own weapons but hesitated, unsure whether they should draw on a fellow cop. Murphy raised his gun until it was pointing directly at Rodriguez's chest. His finger rested on the trigger and his whole body was shaking with rage and adrenaline. "Nobody moves," he shouted to the room. "Nobody calls for help. This is between me and her." Officer Jake Collins had his hand on his own weapon but had not drawn it yet. He could see that Murphy was beyond reason, but he also knew that pulling a gun on another officer could make the situation explode into violence. "Murphy, put the gun down," Collins said in the calmest voice he could manage. "This isn't worth it, man. Think about your family." Murphy kept his eyes locked on Rodriguez but shouted back at Collins. My family is going to lose everything because of her. She's going to destroy my career over a stupid cafeteria seat. She's going to ruin my life because she can't handle being told the truth about herself." Sergeant Amy Patterson slowly moved her hand toward her radio to call for backup, but Murphy noticed her movement immediately. "Don't touch that radio, Patterson," he screamed. "I see everyone in this room. If anyone tries to call for help, things are going to get a lot worse." Rodriguez looked directly into Murphy's eyes and spoke in a steady, quiet voice. "Kevin, I need you to lower your weapon. You're a police officer. You took an oath to protect people, not threaten them. This is not who you want to be." Murphy laughed, bitterly at her use of his first name. "Don't pretend like you know me or care about me. You came here to destroy cops like me. You came here to push your agenda and get rid of anyone who doesn't think like you do. Well, I'm not going to let that happen." The security cameras mounted in the corners of the cafeteria were recording everything. The digital files would show Murphy drawing his weapon on a superior officer in front of dozens of witnesses. There would be no way to deny what had happened. or claim it was something different. Rodriguez could see that Murphy was beyond rational thought, but she knew she had to keep trying to talk him down. Kevin, you have 12 years of service. You have a pension and benefits, you have a future. Don't throw all of that away over this moment. Put the gun down and we can work through this together. Murphy's grip on the weapon tightened. Work through this? You just suspended me in front of everyone. You called me a racist. You tried to humiliate me. There's nothing to work through. My career is over because of you. Officer Collins decided he could not wait any longer. He drew his own weapon and pointed it at Murphy while staying behind an overturned table for cover. Murphy, I'm ordering you to drop your weapon immediately. You know I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to. The sight of Collins's gun pointed at him seemed to shock Murphy back to partial awareness of his situation. He looked around the cafeteria and saw that several other officers now had their weapons drawn. He was outnumbered and surrounded, but his rage was still burning too hot for him to think clearly. Sergeant Patterson had managed to quietly key her radio and whisper a request for immediate backup to the cafeteria. Within seconds, the sound of running footsteps could be heard in the hallway outside. Murphy heard the approaching officers and realized that his situation was becoming hopeless. This is all her fault, Murphy shouted, waving his gun toward Rodriguez. She started this whole thing. She could have just moved to a different table, but she had to make it into some big power play. She had to show everyone that she was in charge. Rodriguez took a small step forward, moving closer to Murphy despite the gun pointed at her. Her movement surprised everyone in the room, including Murphy himself. Kevin, I did not start this. You started this when you decided that your anger was more important than your oath as a police officer. You can still end this the right way. Murphy stared at Rodriguez with a mixture of hatred and confusion. Part of him knew that she was telling the truth. He had started the confrontation by demanding that she move from his table. He had escalated it with his racist comments. He had drawn his weapon when she tried to leave, but his pride would not let him admit that he was wrong. The cafeteria doors burst open as backup officers flooded into the room with their weapons drawn. Captain Tom Bradley, the shift commander, was leading the response team. He quickly assessed the situation and saw Murphy holding a gun on Rodriguez, while several other officers had their weapons trained on Murphy. Everyone freeze, Captain Bradley shouted. Murphy, drop your weapon immediately. That's a direct order from your superior officer. Murphy glanced at the captain but kept his gun pointed at Rodriguez. She started this, Captain. She came in here trying to change everything. She disrespected me in front of everyone. I was just trying to defend myself. Captain Bradley had known Murphy for 8 years and had always suspected that something like this might happen eventually. Murphy had always been aggressive and difficult to control, but he had never crossed the line this far before. Murphy, put the gun down and we'll sort this out. Nobody has to get hurt here. Rodriguez could see that Murphy was starting to realize the full consequences of his actions. His hand was shaking more violently and sweat was running down his face. She knew that cornered people sometimes made desperate decisions, so she tried one more time to reach him. Kevin, your daughter Emma is 10 years old, right? What do you think she would say if she saw you right now? What do you think she would want you to do? The mention of his daughter's name hit Murphy like a physical blow. Emma was the most important thing in his life, and the thought of her seeing him like this made his stomach turn. For the first time since drawing his weapon, Murphy began to think about something other than his anger. Murphy's gun hand started to lower slowly as the weight of his situation finally began to sink in. He looked around the room at all the officers, pointing weapons at him, and realized that his career in law enforcement was over no matter what happened next. Murphy's gun slowly moved downward until it was pointing at the floor instead of at Rodriguez. His breathing was heavy, and his whole body was shaking as the reality of what he had done began to hit him. The cafeteria remained silent except for the sound of his ragged breathing and the quiet static from police radios. Captain Bradley kept his weapon trained on Murphy, but spoke in a calm voice. That's good, Murphy. Now place the gun on the floor and kick it away from you. Do it slowly and keep your hands where everyone can see them. Murphy looked down at his service weapon as if he was seeing it for the first time. The gun that had been his tool and protection for 12 years now felt like a heavy burden in his hand. He knew that placing it on the floor would be the final act that ended his career, but he also knew he had no choice. With shaking hands, Murphy bent down and placed his gun on the cafeteria floor. The metal made a loud clacking sound as it hit the tile. He then used his foot to push the weapon away from himself, sending it sliding across the floor toward Captain Bradley. Officer Collins immediately moved forward with handcuffs while keeping his own weapon ready. "Murphy, put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest." His voice was professional but sad. Collins had worked with Murphy for 6 years and had never imagined that things would end this way. Murphy did not resist as Collins placed the handcuffs on his wrists. The cold metal felt strange against his skin. He had put handcuffs on thousands of suspects over the years, but he had never imagined what it would feel like to wear them himself. Rodriguez finally allowed herself to take a deep breath as Murphy was secured. Her hands were steady, but she could feel her heart still beating. Fast from the adrenaline, she had remained calm during the confrontation, but now that it was over, she realized how close she had come to being seriously hurt or killed. Captain Bradley picked up Murphy's weapon and secured it as evidence. He then turned to address the room full of officers who had witnessed everything. "I want everyone to write detailed reports about what they saw and heard here today. This incident will be thoroughly investigated, and I expect complete honesty from everyone." Several officers were still holding up their phones, having recorded the entire confrontation. The digital evidence would make it impossible for Murphy to claim that events had happened differently than they actually did. There would be multiple videos showing him drawing his weapon on Rodriguez and making racist comments. Murphy was led out of the cafeteria in handcuffs while other officers watched in silence. Some shook their heads in disappointment. Others looked relieved that the situation had ended without anyone being shot. A few seemed angry that one of their fellow officers had crossed such a serious line. Within an hour of Murphy's arrest, Police Chief Robert Hayes was reviewing the security camera footage from the cafeteria. The digital recording showed everything clearly, from Murphy's initial demand that Rodriguez move from his table to the moment he drew his weapon and pointed it at her. Chief Hayes had been leading the department for 8 years and had dealt with many difficult situations, but he had never seen anything as clear-cut as this case. There was no ambiguity about what had happened. There were no questions about who was at fault. Murphy had committed multiple serious crimes in front of dozens of witnesses and security cameras. The chief immediately called the district attorney's office to discuss criminal charges. Drawing a weapon on another person was assault with a deadly weapon, which was a felony. Making threats while armed elevated the charges even further. The racist comments Murphy had made could add hate crime enhancements to the charges. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Murphy had been formally charged with assault with a deadly weapon, terroristic threats, and civil rights violations. The district attorney announced that additional charges might be filed as the investigation continued. Murphy's bail was set at $50,000. Chief Hayes then turned his attention to Murphy's employment status. The department's policies were clear about officers who committed felony crimes while on duty. Murphy's termination was immediate and non-negotiable. His police powers were revoked, his badge and equipment were confiscated, and his access to department facilities was permanently banned. Murphy's police pension, which he had been building for 12 years, was also forfeited due to his criminal conduct. The benefits package that should have supported him in retirement disappeared along with his job. His health insurance was canceled, and his department-issued life insurance policy was voided. The news of Murphy's arrest and termination spread quickly through the police department and then to the local media. By evening, the story was being reported on television and social media. Video clips from officers' phones showed Murphy pointing his gun at Rodriguez, and the footage went viral within hours. Rodriguez spent the rest of that day meeting with Chief Hayes and other department leaders about the incident. They discussed what had led to the confrontation and what could be done to prevent similar situations in the future. Rodriguez proposed several reforms to improve the department's handling of misconduct complaints. The chief agreed to implement new training programs focused on recognizing and addressing racist behavior among officers. He also established new procedures for investigating complaints more thoroughly and holding officers accountable for their actions. Rodriguez would lead these reform efforts as part of her internal affairs duties. Murphy's family learned about his arrest when reporters started calling their home for comments. His wife was shocked and embarrassed by what her husband had done. Their 10-year-old daughter Emma could not understand why her father was in jail, or why other kids at school were talking about him. The police union initially tried to defend Murphy, claiming that he had been provoked, and that his actions were not as serious as they appeared. However, when union leaders saw the video evidence and witness statements, they quietly withdrew their support. Even the union could not defend an officer who had pointed a gun at a superior officer over a cafeteria seat. Murphy's lawyer advised him to plead guilty to the charges in exchange for a lighter sentence. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and fighting the charges would only result in a longer prison term. Murphy eventually accepted a plea deal that included 2 years in prison and 5 years of probation. The incident became a turning point for the entire police department. Officer misconduct complaints increased as citizens became more confident that their concerns would be taken seriously. Several problematic officers resigned rather than face investigation. The department's relationship with minority communities began to improve as news of the swift action spread. Rodriguez used Murphy's case as an example during training sessions for new officers. She would show the security camera footage and explain how quickly a career could be destroyed by racism and poor judgment. The story became a powerful warning about the consequences of misconduct. Murphy served 18 months in prison before being released on parole. He was banned from working in law enforcement anywhere in the country. At age 42, he had to find a completely new career while carrying the burden of being a convicted felon. His 12 years of police service had been erased by 5 minutes of rage and racism. The empty seat at Murphy's former table in the cafeteria became available to any officer who wanted to use it. The table no longer belonged to anyone in particular, and officers from all backgrounds felt welcome to sit there. It had become a symbol of how the department was changing for the better.